Hello and welcome to Why Wasn't It Better? I'm your host, Patrick Darms.
And I'm your co-host, Anton Pross.
And Anton, we're getting into the summer season.
Oh man, summer season. You know what that means. Gotta get my tan on.
Tan on, summer movies on,
Ooh, blockbusters perhaps.
blockbuster sequels.
Yeah, nowadays a lot of blockbusters in the summer. It's usually, you could count yourself like a Disney movie, a Marvel film, and funny enough, a lot of horror movies in the summer now.
Yes, and one of the reasons why we're covering Jaws 2 today is because of an email that I received from a listener who rightfully asked the question, why are you only covering horror movies around Halloween? And I didn't have a good answer, so I went to our list and I thought Jaws 2 fit the bill for such a request. But I don't want to say too much because that would step on our reason of why the movie's chosen. Quick bit of admin. We have various levels of YouTube subscription if any of the YouTube listeners are interested in upping their support for us. And then, of course, for a little bit more direct support, we have a Patreon. That is patreon.com/WWIB official. You can get things like early access to episodes and ad-free. You can even get some more premium features like requesting a movie directly to us. If you pay us a specific amount of money, we will cover a film of your choosing. We've already done one for one of our patrons, and we may do some again.
Yeah, folks, so you want us to cover a great movie, a good movie, a bad movie, you know what the subscription tier is. But either way, we thank you all, our current listeners and subscribers, and any future ones coming in.
Indeed. For more information on that, because we could bore you with all the subscription details by just saying them here, but we won't do that. You can read it on your own time if you're interested. So click that link. And as always, if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and you like what you hear, give us a follow, give us a 5-star review. Every little bit counts. And with that being said, Anton, why don't you intro the film for us and we can dive right into these seas.
Doo-doo. 4 years after the shark attacks that left Amity Island reeling, police chief Martin Brody finds new trouble lurking in the waters. Mayor Vaughn wants to rid the beach town of the stain on its reputation, but the disappearance of a pair of divers suggests that all is not right. When Chief Brody voices his warnings about holding a sailing competition, everyone thinks it's post-traumatic stress. And the tagline, of course, is just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water. Released in June 16, 1978 by Universal Pictures and the Zanuck Brown Company. Directed by Genet Schwark.
Shark?
Yep.
Did you say shark?
Screenplay by Carl Gottlieb and Howard Sackler, based on characters created by Peter Benchley, starring Roy Scheider, Lorraine Gary, Murray Hamilton, Joseph Mascolo, Jeffrey Kramer, Mark Gruner, and Ann Dusenberry. With a budget of $30 million, so that's $145 million adjusted for inflation, with a box office of $208 million, so $1 billion adjusted for inflation. Today we're talking about Jaws 2. So, Pat, we had a really, really great intro on what brought us here today, but why don't we elaborate more? Why are we talking about Jaws 2?
Well, it is the 50th anniversary of the first Jaws this week by the time this episode releases. 50 years ago, the summer of 1975, a shark movie comes out directed by a young up-and-comer named Steven Spielberg. It is more or less credited with creating the template for the modern blockbuster. It made $474 million in 1975 dollars, so that's like $1.6 billion adjusted for inflation. It was the highest grossing film ever at the time, and it, without going too much into it, it redefined Hollywood's expectations for big budget summer 4-quadrant movies. But I think a lot of people overlook this fact, Anton. The original Jaws was nominated for Best Picture, which is even now a horror movie, and I think we can call Jaws a horror movie.
I think so. Absolutely.
Pretty rare for a horror movie to get that kind of awards attention, especially back then.
Yeah, I mean, Psycho, pretty big.
Didn't get a Best Picture nomination.
But it didn't. Yeah, but it didn't get a Psycho. It did not get one. But I am reminded that it was very, very, how should we say, robbed.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But now it's changed because we do have the substance that was nominated for this past year's Academy Awards.
Right. Yeah, it happens a little bit more often now. But back then, pretty rare. Of course, the sequel, which we're talking about today, Jaws 2, comes out 3 years later. Why are we not talking about the first Jaws? It doesn't quite fit the criteria for why wasn't it better, does it?
No.
That
but
movie exceeded all and any expectation imaginable.
Yeah, maybe we cover that one on April Fool's Day. But we also talk about any movie here.
We do. Well, I mean, we stick to the script, I think, pretty much. We make exceptions occasionally. Jaws would be a huge exception. Jaws 2, on the other hand, I wanted to cover this because of the email from a listener that I mentioned. Horror in the summer. And this is a great summer movie, I think.
Yeah, it's got the vibes. It definitely has the right aesthetic.
The other reason I wanted to cover it is, look, it's nowhere near as good as the original. I'm not going to pretend that. But I have a lot of time for this movie. I think it gets unfairly lumped together with Jaws 3 and Jaws the Revenge, which are, pretty horrible movies.
Yep.
Especially the fourth one is considered one of the worst movies ever. But I always liked Jaws 2. I always had time for it. I always felt differently about it. It's the only Jaws sequel that I think is really worth talking about.
Yeah, and I'll say this: we've talked about some horror sequels that have been pretty terrible on this podcast, so those set the bar pretty high. I'm looking at you, Halloween 3,
Exorcist 2.
Ooh.
But the bar is pretty low for horror sequels at this point. Maybe it was higher then, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think for me, when I say higher, it's like how badly can these go?
I don't know that there's a bottom.
Yeah,
because just when you think you've seen the worst horror sequel ever, there's worse.
It's true.
Although I don't know, could you do worse than Exorcist 2? Be hard.
Oh, that'd be really hard because that is both painful and boring.
This is really the first and only Jaws sequel that's worth talking about. It is a shameless rehash of the first one. As far as I can tell, it's the first quote unquote "It Happened Again" sequel.
Yeah, very good call out, Pat.
It's weirdly not that bad. So you can almost argue this is a "Why Wasn't It Worse" episode.
But at the same time, it does have its faults, and I think
people don't like this movie.
And we do have to kind of point at some different things that we've already assessed sequels tend to do that we don't love here. But
it has one of the best movie taglines of all time. Just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water. Pretty famous tagline.
Oh, yeah. Solid tagline.
Great poster. Because, the original Jaws is, I don't know, probably one of the 10 best movie posters of all time. This is pretty good, though, the water skier.
Yeah, it's also during a time where movie posters had a lot more character.
Because they were actual artwork. And I'm not saying that there aren't great movie posters today. I've seen them. But there's something about Photoshop that made it seem lazier.
Yeah, there is no getting around the attention and care that artists had to put during this era of movie posters.
I don't know how many times I've seen this movie on the USA or TNT network back in the day, but this seemed like it almost played on cable more than the first one, because I would assume it was cheaper for the cable channels to just get the rights to the sequels than the original Jaws. So I saw this movie a lot as a kid, or I at least saw big chunks of it.
Yeah, I imagine, even when I think about streaming distribution now, I'm sure it was very similar in that partnerships allowed for, hey, you can use this portion of the library. We don't really care about this portion of the library. Just go at it. And this was probably in that category.
My question for you is, how much of the scenes from this movie did you confuse with the first one?
Oh, man, it is. Especially when I was younger, I think that there was probably more than there was more times than I can count that I probably mixed them together. But now that I'm older, of course, I know which one's the classic.
I think there are scenes in this movie that we'll talk about that are deliberately supposed to confuse you with the first one. Like when Brody shoots up the beach, it's filmed almost identically to the scene where what's the boy's name who gets killed by the shark in the first movie? They're filmed almost identically.
Right.
But we can get into it then. So, production history for this.
So, almost immediately after the first Jaws came out, Universal was demanding a sequel. Producers Richard Zanuck and David Brown acted quickly, knowing if they didn't make it, someone else was going to. Universal was doing it with or without their participation. Later in 1975, even Spielberg commented that, quote, making a sequel to anything is just a cheap carny trick, end quote. And when asked by the producers to direct the sequel, he did not even respond. He later clarified his stance by citing the negative experience he had making the first one, saying, I would have done the sequel if I hadn't had such a horrible time at sea on the first film. And that reminds me of Waterworld. The studio moved forward with an 18-month pre-production process. Howard Sackler, who had contributed to the first film script, was hired to write the first draft. His initial idea was for a prequel based on the sinking of the USS Indianapolis and the story told by Quint in the first film. Although Universal president Sid Sheinberg liked his idea, he rejected it as being too expensive to film. Roy Scheider had no interest in returning as Chief Martin Brody. However, in early 1977, he dropped out of playing the main character in The Deer Hunter, the role that ended up being played by Robert De Niro. He was still under contract with Universal, so the studio offered to forgive his failure to fulfill his contractual obligation if he agreed to appear in Jaws 2. Scheider reluctantly did so and very famously disliked doing it, complaining that there was nothing new to create and that people would be watching the film to see the shark, not him. Universal took care of him, paying him a $500,000 salary plus $35,000 for each additional week that the studio, or which the schedule ran over, and points on the box office profits. Our guy got paid. Brody got paid. Richard Dreyfuss, who played Matt Hooper in the first film, said he chose not to return because Spielberg was not directing. Yeah, legendary. John Hancock was hired to direct the film, and like the first film, Martha's Vineyard was used as a location for the town scenes, but most of the film was shot on the Emerald Coast of Florida. Yes, the Gulf of America. Oh, we cut that out. No, we'll keep it. Hancock began filming in June 1977. After nearly a month of filming, Universal executives disliked what they saw. Hancock's dailies were considered too tonally dark, and they wanted a more lighthearted and action-oriented story. Additionally, Hancock ran into trouble with Sheinberg, who suggested to Hancock and Tristan that Sheinberg's wife, actress Lorraine Gary, quote, should go out in a boat and help to rescue the kids. When told of the idea, Zanuck replied, over my dead body. The next draft of the film screenplay was turned in with Gary not going out to sea. Hancock says that this and his later firing of another actress who turned out to be a Universal executive's girlfriend contributed to Hancock being fired from the picture. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff you can read about the firing of John Hancock. He was very disliked by Verna Fields, who had won an Oscar for editing the first film. She had recently been promoted to vice president at Universal and was trying to establish herself. This was quite a troubled production from start to finish, and there's a really great YouTube channel called Represent This that goes into details about this film.
Really generous of them to dig up one of our founding fathers to direct this film. It's a shame it didn't work out for him.
Yeah.
The production shut down for 3 weeks while the producers searched for a replacement director. Carl Gottlieb was brought in to revise the script, adding humor and reducing some of the violence. At one point, Steven Spielberg actually considered returning to direct, but because of his contract for Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which he was in the middle of filming, he wouldn't be available for almost a year, which ruled this out. Production designer Joe Alves, who would go on to direct Jaws 3, and Verna Fields proposed that they co-direct the film, but this idea was rejected by the Directors Guild. So the job ended up going to Jeannot Schwark, whom Alves knew from working on the TV series Night Gallery, which Spielberg actually worked on before he got into film. I think it was very astute of them to hire a director whose last name rhymes with shark.
I think it's a... How do you say? It's poetic. It rhymes.
It's like poetry. It rhymes. John Shark, he did a lot of interviews in the making of his film, which you can watch. He doesn't sound like George Lucas, though. Schwark brought his own ideas to the film. He felt the action sequences were fine, but that more supporting characters from the first film needed to return. Most importantly, he wanted the shark to be shown much more. 3 mechanical sharks were built for the production, all of which were much more complex than those used in the first film. Cable Junction, the island shown at the film's climax, was actually a floating barge covered with fiberglass rocks. Just like with the first film, shooting on water proved to be very complicated. Roy Scheider often argued with Schwark. I'm going to mispronounce his name for the rest of the episode now. Roy Scheider often argued with Schwark on set. Scheider complained in front of the extras that Schwark was wasting time with technical issues and the extras while ignoring the principal actors. A meeting was called between the two, David Brown and Verna Fields, in which Scheider and Schwark were encouraged to settle their differences. The discussion became heated and a physical fight broke out, which Brown and Fields broke up. I can totally picture Roy Scheider just doing all this too. Principal photography ended 3 days before Christmas. They were working around the clock to finish before the holiday, 22 days straight without a break.
Oof.
John Williams returned to score this film. It ended up costing $30 million, which was more than 3 times the original.
And that was in 1970s money, people.
Yeah. Well, you said the budget. I mean, this realistically would have been one of the most expensive movies ever made at the time.
Yeah, makes sense. Especially with the technology that they were working with.
Yeah, which I will call rudimentary.
Yeah, which we'll call early inventions of a robot.
Yeah, that's your third smoke with coffee. We were talking about this before the recording. There's a ton of merchandise associated with this film. Anything you can think of. Topps printed trading cards for this film.
Yep.
It's I'm interested in now because I have Moonraker trading cards from the same era. So why not Jaws 2?
I think that there's definitely an era for trading cards, for especially after Star Wars. Like we talked about earlier on before the call. Star Wars really set off with the merchandising, and studios of course see that and say, well, we want a piece of that pie.
I got to look into the Topps trading cards. So this ended up with a 56% Rotten Tomatoes score and a 5.8 IMDb score. Pretty low IMDb score. It didn't make as much money as the first one, but Jaws was still a huge hit at the box office. It was the third highest grossing film of 1978 internationally. Do you know what the 2 films were that finished ahead of it?
Smokey and the Bandit.
No. Wrong year.
Yeah.
One of them's a musical.
Oh, one of them's a musical, eh?
Yeah, one of the most successful musicals ever.
Okay, well, can't be The Sound of Music. It's too late.
It's not The Wiz, which came out the same year.
Yeah.
You have to know this as a musical fan.
There's a lot of musicals out there.
Grease.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, and then sounds like you don't know what the other one is, Superman.
I was like, give me some hints. All right.
Oh, yeah, Superman, the movie.
Yeah.
Not really surprising. Like Grease was enormous.
Good for Danny Zuko.
Travolta. Oh, I gotta cut that.
Oh, Travolta.
Oh, Johnny boy.
I love how Family Guy makes fun of Grease and Travolta a lot.
Constantly.
Yeah.
Do you think Travolta would have improved Jaws 2?
Oh, I would have loved to see that.
I'll say yes, and I'll say I would have wanted Travolta in Jaws 3. If he had been one of the, like, what was it, like SeaWorld employees?
Yeah.
You're telling me there's a shark?
Another
one? Didn't we kill one earlier?
Oh, man.
Would you like me to dig my thumbs into your neck a little bit? Hey. Okay. Let's talk why wasn't it better. Number one reason, it's unoriginal. I mentioned this in the intro. I think this is the first It Happened Again sequel.
Ooh, and if it's starting the trend, this is my least favorite kind of sequel.
We've covered a couple of these already. Die Hard 2, Home Alone 2. If any of the listeners can think of a It Happened Again sequel that came out before Jaws 2, and I'm talking like the modern quote-unquote blockbuster era, please write in and tell us. But I think this is the first one, because this is a shameless rehash of the first Jaws. It follows the same structure. It's the same kind of shark terrorizing the same exact town with the same exact police chief, Chief Brody. He has to step up to deal with it. It's even the same story beats. Like, he's trying to convince others.
The town.
Yeah. Of the danger.
But they're like, no, it's good. The political machinations behind the scenes.
I don't know, Chief. My kids were in the water too, Marty. It's the same guy, same mayor. So unbelievable.
You think they would just be like, believe it straight up second time around?
Apparently not. They're just like, no. It's how many sharks could there be?
I think the category for this too of just It Happened Again. There's no way that the success of this movie was going to change that trajectory of you studios making sequels in that same vein. If anything, this probably propelled it to extreme investment.
You could make the case that it's an influential sequel.
Yeah.
Because it proved that the It Happened Again sequel could be very successful. Because, didn't make as much money as the first one. It made a ton of money.
It did, but it's one of those things where studios are probably very short-sighted, and seeing that in the short term, it made some money.
Think?
But they should have just left Jaws alone.
They do change some things, though.
Yeah. The family aspect.
Yeah. The group of teenage victims.
Keep it young. Yeah, keep the teenagers in there.
Yeah. Look, it can't hold a candle to the first one. I'm not going to pretend that. But we're comparing this to one of the greatest films ever made, right?
Right. But we're trying to also do within the lens of, does it stand on its own?
I kind of like this movie.
It's entertaining.
It is entertaining. I did not care for the other two It Happened Again sequels that we covered. I really didn't like Home Alone 2, and I was really disappointed by Die Hard 2. I don't find this movie disappointing because it's so shamelessly ripping off the first one. Even the tagline, just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water, that tells you everything you need to know about the movie.
Yeah. And even at that same point, I totally know what you mean. There's a quality about the film that it's still very entertaining despite not being a quote unquote good film. And I feel like it's still following the same beats of a very successful film and very capable cast, which I think helps. And
some of them are capable.
Yeah.
The ones that matter are capable. I'll give you that.
Right.
I wrote down, it's like watching a very competent Jaws tribute band.
Yeah, like, you know what it reminded me of? It's like if you gave like a B movie like a bigger budget.
Yeah, this is definitely a B movie.
Yeah, it's and
a real actor in the lead.
Right, like this is not just like the fifth Belushi brother or something. Like this is it's Brody, and that is like, yeah, that's solid if you're able to land the main lead from the first film. But everything else around it, then it just kind of feels like Cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, if that makes sense.
They do change some things up. I mean, the basic story structure is identical to the first one. Interestingly enough, there's a novelization of this written by Hank Searles. Quite unusual for film novelizations. It's based on a much earlier version of the screenplay. Near as I can tell, it was based on the screenplay that they were using before John Hancock got fired. It's quite different than the final film. I'll just go through some of the beats for you. So the first two set pieces are more or less the same, like the women in the water ski sequence. It's a husband and wife in the book. And then the two divers at the beginning, one of whom takes the photo of the great white shark's eye, right?
It's a shark.
It's a shark. Although the town council is like, it's nothing, it's seaweed. I don't know what else it could be. There are subplots involving an injured porpoise. There's a mobbed up big city cop. There's like a corrupt pharmacist. I'm not making this up. This is all in the original script.
I believe you.
Eddie and Tina don't get a death scene. They're not even in the story. Brody doesn't shoot up the beach. And then like the boating regatta involving all the kids, that happens at like the very end. So it's pretty different. But I understand why they went in a different direction for what we saw in the final film, because it's pretty boring.
Yeah, it's very clear who this was geared at, too.
This movie knows what it is. I get why they made these changes, and I'm grateful they made these changes. If you went to see this movie in 1978, you don't care about, like, are you interested in a mobbed up police detective? No, you want shark action.
I want to see mass panic around sharks.
I mentioned this to you earlier. This is so derivative of the first one, though, in some scenes. When Brody shoots up the beach, because I hadn't seen this movie in a few years, I was like, wait, this isn't from the first one? I could have sworn it was from the first one. Because if you remember in the first one, when the boy gets killed by the shark, Brody does basically the same thing minus the gun, where he's running into the water to get everybody out. It's filmed identically. Schwark knew what he was doing.
Yeah, but I think it was a nice little switch up.
Yeah. If you're interested, there's about 8 minutes of deleted scenes that are available on YouTube. I don't think they add much except one. Did you see any of these?
I was gonna say, was it the 1 minute of the shark doing stand-up comedy behind the brick wall?
Yes.
Yeah,
he had pretty good jokes. Besides that, the actual vote when the town council decides to fire Brody. I wish they had kept that in because Mayor Vaughn is the only one to stick up for him. And it was kind of nice to see him stick up for Brody in the deleted scene. I really wish they had kept that in the film because it's a nice bit of character development, like building on the first film.
Yeah, it's it's a continuity piece that actually would have felt very nuanced and heartfelt.
Now, here's a good question scenario for you, Anton. So you mentioned how this is like your least favorite kind of sequel, the unoriginal sequel. I agree with you. I think this is the exception because the third and fourth Jaws films, they are prime examples of sequels where originality does not always matter. They are far more original stories than this film, and they are far worse. They're far more stupid.
I would argue that continuation of the Jaws franchise was less about any originality, more so than just banking off of like the name of the IP. Jaws 2 was much, like you're saying, was much more like the original film, but once you get to 3D and The Revenge, I think that how many times can you do a story about a shark that
you can't? I mean,
you can't. But then at the same time, I look at many other films that follow like that same, or many films that have like multiple sequels in them, and you could argue that some of the film storylines are a bit more original, but they're not very good. And I'm talking about like your Friday the 13th, your
Planet of the Apes.
Planet of the Apes. Sometimes they could be very distinct from the first one, but
Halloween 3 was original.
Yeah, at least.
It was.
Yeah. Or just any of the Nightmare on Elm Street films.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the difference between Jaws 2 and the sequels that followed, not only is this the least stupid of the sequels, it's the best executed, and it's, I think the key thing that sets this apart from 3 and 4 is the star power of Roy Scheider.
Yep.
Those films are so poorly acted. And Roy Scheider, he was like a real movie star with like real acting chops. He was a multiple Academy Award nominee. You mentioned this earlier. This is basically a B movie with a bigger budget and then an actual movie star in the lead. And that's the difference for me. Like that's why I find this movie watchable. That's why I have time for this movie. Roy Scheider as Brody.
Yeah, absolutely. Even if he's phoning it in.
Well, you wouldn't know it.
No, you wouldn't know it.
He gives a great performance. We can talk about it now. I mean, the second reason I have written down is kind of the theme of today's episode. Why wasn't it worse? This movie should have been worse than what it is. That's why I will defend this movie. And I don't understand when people say Jaws 2 is a horrible movie. That's completely unfair in my opinion. This is a pretty good film.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I think that there's definitely the first Jaws sets pretty high expectations for what a horror film can be. And I think like that is also within the same lens. But considering what we know on paper for the film, this really could have been bad.
I'm going to try to check my bias here a little bit, though. I do think this movie's pretty good. But is this movie actually pretty good? Or are the two sequels that followed this so bad they make this movie look better than it is?
I'm sure there's a little bit of that. But we always stand by, can a movie stand on its own two legs? And I feel like this film in itself, within the vacuum of Jaws 2, it's still very entertaining.
I think it does stand on its own two legs. Even when one of them gets eaten by the shark. That's another thing I confused with the second film, with the first film. You know when like you see the leg like falling to the bottom? That's in the first one. I thought it was in this one. This is less gory than the first one, which I found interesting.
It is less gory, isn't it?
Because let's face it, the first film pushes the boundaries of the PG rating.
Was it all the blood in the water?
The leg floating, Quint getting bitten in half. When the kid gets killed, there's like a fire hydrant of blood that like shoots up out of the water. Yeah, it pushes the boundaries.
Yeah.
The reason why I think you can tell this movie isn't bad is the DVD release of this that Universal gave. It's like a 2-disc special edition, really special treatment. They're treating it like some kind of classic, loaded with special features. Pretty cool.
That's generous by Universal to do that.
Well, it made a lot of money for them.
It's just kind of funny, like the amount of money that it made. Maybe earlier on in the park's history there was more reference, but no real reference to Jaws 2 on the Universal Studios tour.
That's a shame.
Yeah.
Well, I guess if you're going to reference one shark movie, it might as well be the first.
And Waterworld. Make sure to reference Waterworld at Universal.
We're covering Waterworld later this season.
Woo!
I'm looking forward to it. I haven't seen that movie in a while. That was another
Maybe
TNT USA staple in the late 90s, early 2000s, right?
that one, Robin Hood. I remember Robin Hood on a lot.
Prince of Thieves.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, man. They were all about Costner. And
Oh
Jaws,
yeah.
too. Roy Scheider. What an easy guy to root for.
When it comes to like casting decisions of good head on his shoulders, someone that's a good family man, and again, someone you can easily root for, fits the bill.
And as my wife pointed out, low-key svelte.
Oh.
She was like, wow, she's like, he's like underrated handsome. I'm like, yeah, he
Yeah.
is. Tan, chain smokes Marlboro Reds like it's nobody's business.
Yeah.
With coffee.
Very famous scenes where has cigarette in his mouth.
Yes. He didn't give up smoking by the time this movie came out. He's just sucking them down.
Yeah, he's just ripping cigs left and right.
I wrote down he's an easy guy to root for despite the fact that he goes absolutely crazy in this movie.
Or that he went absolutely crazy because of this movie.
Well, they paid him for his time. Look, he may have hated being in this. He said he wanted to give the best performance that he could. I think he does.
Yeah, and again, a lot of respect for that. I think that I hear about actors that they go in and they do the job begrudgingly, and you could see it on screen. Not everyone will do what Scheider's willing to do, I think.
I think he's every bit as good in this as he is in the first one, especially the scene with his wife right after he gets fired and he's drunk.
Mhm.
It's like A+ stuff from him.
Yeah.
He was a real talent. Scheider was. He's easy to overlook because I think you didn't see him in much after the 80s. His career as a leading man kind of died off. This is the definition of a carry job. He's got no one else to help him in this film. It's just him. If his performance didn't work, this movie would be a lot less for it.
He does not have his same crew around him. He just has a bunch of bumbling teenagers.
He's got no Richard Dreyfuss. He's got no Robert Shaw. He's got Lorraine Gary. Fine. She's fine.
Fine.
Right. He's got, Murray Hamilton, Mayor Vaughn, who's kind of a wet noodle. My kids were in the water too, Marty. And he's got, I guess you could give Jeffrey Kramer some credit as Deputy Hendricks, who gets promoted to chief. And then you got a bunch of groovy hippie hair teenagers.
I swear. All the hippies and just teens.
I also wrote down Scheider is just as good in the first film, and he's playing hero ball. I love his monologue to the town council. I've been through that hell before, and I don't intend to go through that hell again. It was the eye. Yeah. It's the eye.
Yeah, no, it's so you're so right with the hero ball statement. Now, I think this is very unique. Do you think that if they were able to bring back more of the cast, do you think this would have been better or worse?
I would have loved to have seen Richard Dreyfuss in this.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think Robert Shaw could have returned because he got eaten by the shark in the first film, and he also died in real life, unfortunately.
Yeah.
By the way, sidebar, Robert Shaw, not nominated for supporting actor for the first Jaws. Like, that's a robbery.
Kind of legendary role.
Yeah. Incredible. Yeah, the first Jaws has, like, between the three male leads, that's, like, iconic heroes in a movie.
What is it? The scratching on the chalkboard.
All of it. Every scene.
Yeah.
He dominates every scene, but they're all great together. Would you have wanted to see Dreyfuss in this?
It's interesting because I think we talk so highly about, like, we get Brody again from the first film, and I feel like there's enough nostalgia and connection to how great the first film is that anchor really does help lift this film, which is like a glorified B film. If you add more actors from the first film into this, Dreyfuss including, I feel like it becomes a very different film. I feel like then it even feels more like a photocopy of the first film, and I might like it a little less because, again, then it's just more of a photocopy. This kind of feels like
with better acting.
Yeah, but this feels kind of like a spirit board with a really legit piece on it.
That's a really good point. But I was curious, what if that female marine biologist role had been played by Dreyfuss, and Dreyfuss ends up doubting, and Hooper ends up doubting Brody here?
Ooh, that would have been interesting.
Right?
But that's way better from a writing standpoint.
We're just talking about a better movie at that point. You think you might be onto something. It's like, do we appreciate this movie more possibly because of Scheider's hero ball?
Yeah, I definitely appreciate it. I'll say that. Because I made a comment around we have very capable actors, and then you said, well, very capable main actor.
Right. He was a real talent, man. We don't have to get into the whole, like, was Roy Scheider underrated? Between the first Jaws and all that jazz, those are like two of the most iconic 1970s lead roles there are, right? He's
Yeah.
incredible in all that jazz.
Oh, huge. I feel like maybe not known as not one of the first all-time greats that come to mind, but absolutely a classic in Hollywood and one of the all-time
Yeah,
greats.
I feel like he was never quite on that A list, but he probably should have been, because everything I've seen him in, I like him in. Like, he's great in even, the supporting stuff that he did, like Marathon Man, The French
Mhm.
Connection, where he
Yep.
plays Gene Hackman's partner. He got another Oscar nomination for that one, by the way. He's the lead in 2010, the sequel to 2001: A Space Odyssey, which we're going to cover at
Yeah.
some point. Speaking of more unnecessary sequels, he's in a really underrated action movie called Sorcerer. And then years later, he was in. Did you ever see Blue Thunder,
I did.
the
Yeah.
helicopter movie? Pretty cool. I don't
Mhm.
know if it's a great movie, but it's a cool role for him. And then he's in the Russia House with Sean Connery years later that I really liked. And then if you want to get into TV, he was the lead in the short-lived TV series Sequest DSV, which was kind of like Star Trek underwater.
Mhm.
Didn't last that long, but
Star Trek Underwater, Stargate Atlantis.
Atlantis: The Lost Empire? Yeah, big Scheider fan. I like the guy.
He was also did you ever watch Mishima: Life in Four Chapters?
No.
That's a unique film, and that has executive producers Francis Ford Coppola and George Lucas.
I'm assuming it made no money because a lot of
No, it
things
did not.
often didn't make money.
It lost so much money, but it's just a very unique film with the
Should we
subject
cover it?
matter. Ooh, I think that would be, what was it? I think I forget what year, but I think that it was a fairly good budget for the year. I think it was like maybe like 6 or 7 million, and I think it only made like $500,000 in the box office.
Oof. Put it on the
Yeah.
list.
Okay.
Because we're going to cover. Ooh, we have a couple Coppola Lucas collaborations on our
Oh,
list.
but it's a full Japanese cast.
And Roy Scheider.
Oh, he's the narrator.
Oh, that's awesome. I have to see this now. Man, I don't think I've ever heard of that. I'm very intrigued.
I don't know if you remember, I was at a video game convention that ran until like 4 a.m, and I was at like their sellers hall, and I saw the VHS for that film, and I think I texted it to you.
You may have.
Yeah.
I'd be lying to you if I told you I remembered that, but
All good. I know I sent a lot of random photos.
yeah,
so.
you like photo dump me when you're at these conventions, and I'm like, looks great.
Yeah. I'm
Do
like,
you have a
we're-
VHS player still?
We do. We do because it's attached to a CRT. So we have one of those small.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. All right.
Oh.
Yeah, Scheider, he has that everyman quality, right? I wrote, we were
Mhm.
saying how easy he is to root for. He was a movie star, but he doesn't look exactly like a movie star. You know what I mean? Like, you buy him as a police chief.
Right. But what is it? Is it like classically handsome?
According to my wife, no. He's underrated handsome.
Yeah, underrated handsome. Okay. What was it? There was a it's fun. There's like a podcast I was listening to. It was just they were saying, "Oh, old movie stars, like as long as they just like acted well and had a deep voice, like of course they'd be like big movie stars, but they could look they could look like bulldogs." I'm like, "Oh, I can think of a few
There's
examples."
some truth to that. Not Roy Scheider.
Not Roy Scheider.
He's lean.
Yeah. He looks good.
Svelte.
Yeah.
Was the word. He's exactly what the next two Jaws sequels were missing. Just think how poorly acted those films are.
Core. Needs a core.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is absolutely hilarious that no one on the town council, including the mayor, believe him.
Oh, I think it's a pretty big plot hole.
It's the same guy. The same
Yeah,
mayor.
the
Wouldn't it have
same-
made more sense if there was a different mayor?
Or like maybe it would have made sense if it was literally anything else, but something that is already shown to be like a huge issue.
Well, I don't know that this is actually the case, but I don't even know that the film screenplay was trying to imply this. But did you get the sense that there was like a cover up involved with the first film? Because like there's when whatever the real estate developer's name is, when he's showing the like investors the beachfront, he's basically
nothing to worry about here. We're good.
Nobody asks about, like, what happened with the shark attacks like a few years ago. You would just think, I guess without the internet, it wouldn't be that hard to just downplay it.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of they should have played into that more of that's like what's blinding people from actually believing Brody.
I think it would have made way more sense if the mayor was the real estate developer. If it was just a new mayor and he was just like, look, I don't know what happened 4 years ago. I wasn't here, but there's no way we can have this problem again. Lightning doesn't strike twice. I think that makes more sense for the story. But to have the same mayor played by the same guy, and he's just like, remember he tells him, he's like, don't push yourself this time, Marty. It's like, what? Like, he was right the first time.
It's just so, yeah, it's ridiculous. It's definitely a big plot hole, and it would have made for a better scene if he had completely covered it up, and then you get more fatalities and you end up having to reprimand him, being like, you sold out the town's soul. Can you imagine it?
Here's the other thing, Anton. It is ridiculous that the town council doesn't support him. Brody doesn't really do himself any favors by shooting up the beach, though.
No,
he goes a little crazy.
Yeah, that's probably a bit more PTSD.
Goes a little nut, as they would say on Succession.
Yeah. Effective scene.
Great scene.
Yeah, because especially just the big reveal. Oh, you're good. It's just school of fish.
I had a question for you about that. Doesn't the first film establish that using a revolver against a great white shark is useless, even with his poison-tipped ammo?
Yeah.
I like that scene, though, where he's melting the wax. Was it cyanide or something?
Yeah, it was like cyanide, and that's not taking out a shark.
No, and I was thinking about that more. I know a little bit about guns, so if you're making the tips hollow and then coating them in wax, it's just going to make the bullets softer. So it's like even less of a chance of it going through a shark's skin, which is quite thick. You're talking like inches thick skin.
I was going to say, like, once it also, I don't know if you have the best aim with a bullet like that too.
No, a handgun, 25 yards max is like...
Yeah, shooting into the water like that.
Yeah, I got a lot of questions about what Chief Brody was trying to accomplish there. Great scene, though. That's an iconic scene. Yeah. Good enough that I confused it with the first film. Why even bother including the Matt Hooper on the radio scene? It's not even Richard Dreyfuss's voice, because I was checking this on IMDb. I was like, was that... Because, his voice is hard to make out. It's not even him. It's not even an audio cameo.
But it's a call-out.
It's a call-out. Sharks don't take things personally. Clearly, she's never seen Jaws the Revenge.
I don't know. I feel like we are seeing the examples of every other legacy sequel to a major IP. I feel like we get some examples of this in really bad sequels, of course. Like, man, I feel embarrassed even saying them, but probably like
Go on.
Independence Day Resurgence.
It's one of the worst movies I've ever seen.
And it's just, how many call-outs to the first film were in that one, right?
I didn't even finish it. Did I ever tell you that story? No. I was watching it on a plane, and I got 3/4 of the way through it and just shut it off.
I just really enjoyed the first one, so I wanted to watch it, and...
You should have known better.
Should have known better.
At least I was on a plane, and I had a couple drinks in me, and I had an excuse. You had nothing.
No. Space Jam 2 was also really bad, but I didn't have a lot of hope with that one.
Bad movie. I'm going to use this opportunity to once again shit on Alien Romulus. It's a bad movie, and I'm actually going to use this opportunity, Anton. I'm officially changing my score for that film. I gave it a C. It's a D. It's a D. It's a bad movie. I'm tired of hearing about Alien Romulus. It's a bad movie. Do you want to lower your score too?
I do actually want to lower my score.
How low do you want to go? D+?
Oh, I think that's probably smart.
Awesome.
It's because I do agree with you, Pat. And like the more I think about it, it's just the parts that I find enjoyable aren't enough. And it is literally just a cash grab, just like this film.
And yet I will defend Jaws too.
But this film is much more entertaining.
Much more. Because it has great lines like, that's your third smoke already. With coffee.
Yep.
And then she says, try a donut. Any other legacy sequels you want to go after?
Well, I think there's such a long list that it gets embarrassing. Like The Mask, like iconic 90s film The Mask, right? Do a lot of people realize that there was a sequel called Son of the Mask?
I think most people have chosen to believe that movie doesn't exist.
But it's like it's the direct sequel to the first film. And like, how horrible is that?
I never
just a
saw
cash
it. Didn't.
It's just a cash
Yeah,
grab.
I didn't see it.
Cruel Intentions.
Didn't know there was a sequel to that.
Cruel Intentions 2, horrible film. Donnie Darko, random 2000 sequel.
That's not even worth acknowledging. That it's.
But it got released. Why would you release that?
Do you know there's a sequel to American Psycho?
Yes, there is.
There's great examples of this, though. When it works, it works, like Top Gun Maverick.
Top Gun Maverick is great.
We didn't hate Twisters. Not
Cruise,
bad. Not a bad movie.
Yeah. What is it? Cruise Control?
Speed 2?
Speed 2.
Well, that came out shortly after the first Speed.
But it's on a boat?
That is on the list of worst sequels ever made, for sure.
Yeah.
Jaws 3 and Jaws 4 are on that list, for sure.
There's so many films in the equation that are just, you never needed to make it. Or the film had no chance.
They didn't need to make this, and yet it's pretty good. Because this was the 1970s, when Jack Daniels was considered the good stuff.
Is it, though?
I don't know. Was it then?
I don't think, honestly, I don't think it was. I'm pretty sure that was just product placement. It had to have been.
I think it was product placement, but do you remember, like, in high school and college, like, thinking Jack Daniels and Captain Morgan were quality liquor?
But that was because I was a dumb high schooler that didn't know better.
Right. Kind of like the teenagers in this film.
Ooh, and...
What kind of beer do you think they were drinking? Like Natural Light?
Ooh, Natty Light, Miller High Life. Miller High Life, maybe.
Bush?
Ooh, I could see that.
Yeah, Bush.
High schoolers think that Jack Daniels is the best whiskey out there.
Right.
And
It has the name brand recognition.
And high schoolers went to go see this film. It's because of films like this that perpetually feeds Jack Daniels to the next generation.
Let's talk about the production.
All right.
It lacks the touch of an auteur like Spielberg. Jeannot Schwark, he's done a couple other films that you might recognize: Somewhere in Time, Supergirl, Santa Claus the Movie. He wasn't the first choice to begin with. He's doing the Spielberg tribute band thing. I actually think he deserves some praise for this because it's a decent mimicry of Spielberg, and this film clearly has a level of sophistication that the next two don't.
But he has so many Superman connections.
He does. He gave a lot of interviews in the making of documentaries, which you can watch on YouTube. Seems like a cool guy.
Yeah, seems like a cool guy.
He was like very clearly trying to state, like, I was trying to do like what Spielberg had done on the first film. Like, okay, smart. It just like this film, he knew what he was doing. He understood the assignment. Continuity questions for you. So this takes place 4 years after the first film, right?
Right.
Brody's son, Michael, ages like 10 years.
Yeah, that's definitely not a real high schooler, is it?
I mean, he looked about 20, but how old was he in the first film? Like 10, right? Ish?
He was just a kid.
Right.
Basically.
But don't worry. After surviving the events of this film, he would go on to become a marine biologist and work at SeaWorld during the events of Jaws 3D.
Actual SeaWorld, too.
Yeah, it's Jaws 3. One of the problems of this film is that other than Brody's son, who gets knocked out cold during the climax, I didn't know any of the other teenagers' names, really, except for Eddie and Tina, just because they scream their names a bunch of times. There's no real way to root for them other than you're like, I hope his other younger son doesn't get eaten.
Yeah, there's not a ton of emotional investment in the teens.
No.
But I don't know if it was by design. I just found them annoying.
Some of them were annoying. Some of them were semi-intelligent. When they all try to like work together and tie the boats together, you're like, all right, at least they're like trying. One of them looked like Napoleon Dynamite. Dead ringer.
So true.
I wrote down, Jackie looks like Dustin from Stranger Things, and I can't unsee it. You know exactly what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Same haircut.
That's so funny.
Man, the 70s had bad hair.
Or we kind of touched on this, but adults playing teens. That was
the chubby guy with the curly hair.
Yeah,
he's 35.
Yeah, but
that was the era, right? Like Travolta and all the other quote unquote kids in Greece, they're all 30.
Well, this era, like you said, it was this film. What was it, Porky's? Like none of those people were in high school.
Yeah, it was just that's the era. Ann Dusenberry, the girl who plays Tina. Only decent performance, I think. When Eddie gets eaten, it's pretty horrifying. when she's telling him like, swim faster, Eddie, swim faster. It's like pretty,
Yeah.
it's heartfelt.
Yeah, I can see it. I think that I still feel a bit less.
You're like, I don't care.
I just really, I just did not feel this heartfelt.
They're drinking beer and maybe smoking reefers and having premarital sex. And that's the other thing. This film is often called a proto slasher movie.
Oh, they had sex, they're gonna die.
I can kind of see it. I think it's a fair way to cite this movie. It's like a high quality slasher movie, I guess.
Yeah, it's a big budget one. Bigger budget one.
And this is another way maybe the film deserves a little bit more credit than it gets in terms of its influence, because this came out months before Halloween. So sort of ahead of its time in a way.
Yeah, and for any listeners that don't know, like there are definitely sets of rules when it comes to slasher films and understanding those particular tropes, and the more you think about it, this film does fit a few of those tropes, except it also just has a bit more of a heroic ending. So it doesn't necessarily fit it exactly,
right?
But the suspense is very slasher.
I don't think it's a coincidence that this is a Universal movie and they ended up buying the Halloween franchise a few years after this.
I mean, Universal has such a long history with horror films.
Right.
It fits.
I remembered more of the teenagers getting killed than actually get killed. It's not many of them, actually. It's only a handful.
No. You're saying there's not enough?
Maybe. There was at least one or two. You're like, really? He's not going to get eaten?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
The shark would find him delicious. I kind of view this sequel the same way I view, like, Halloween 2. Completely derivative of what came before it, but it's pretty good. Predator 2, Die Hard 2. I actually like this more than Die Hard 2.
I was going to say, I think I like Predator 2 a bit more than I would like this film. But I like this film more than I like Die Hard 2.
But the reason why I cited Halloween 2 is it's filmed the same, which means it's pretty well. I think this is pretty well filmed.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same location. It's pretty much the same supporting cast. It's a passable imitation of Spielberg. I have to say, I that's why I'm pleasantly surprised by this on the rewatch. It's like 60% as good as the original Jaws.
Yeah, and if you go off of a good script and you get enough of the budget and you make it look nice, it's passable. And I feel like that's what we get here. It's very passable.
The shark looks better in this one.
Up to a point. You see more of the shark in this film.
You do. This movie insinuates that a great white shark killed an orca. That's crazy.
Was it like a small orca?
That would never happen in real life, though. Now we know it's the opposite.
Well, we know it's part of it is because orcas travel in packs. Having a sole orca like that being taken out by a great white is very...
not going to happen. What do you think of the set pieces in here?
I thought they were really neat. I thought they were super neat.
Let's talk about the water skier scene. It's nuts.
Iconic.
It's nuts. It's iconic. The fin appearing behind the boat, probably the best shot in the film.
Yep.
Unintentionally hilarious when the woman's reaction is to freak out, dump gasoline all over her boat, and then just fire a flare gun into her own boat and blow herself up.
One of the most unintentionally hilarious things.
You agree, unintentional. Like,
it is unintentionally hilarious.
I mean, the sound, like, if I had subtitles on and like the actual subtitles of her acting were, it is iconic. The Eddie and Tita scene, pretty scary.
That was pretty scary.
So the name of the girl who's trying to save Brody's other son and basically gets swallowed whole.
Ooh,
okay,
that's rough.
That horrified me as a kid.
Yeah, that's rough.
Great shot too when you basically see the shark from like its POV.
Yeah.
The other iconic thing, the shark eating the helicopter. It's iconic. Like, it's crazy.
Did that happen?
It's a pretty dinky helicopter. Like, I guess a great white could do that to a helicopter.
It's too strategic. Sharks don't need to do that.
No, I don't think so. Wouldn't the rotors, the rotor blades have cut the shark in half?
You'd assume so,
right?
That's such a chaotic thing occurring. Yes. Like that. There's no way it would have happened as cleanly.
No, none of it. When the rotor blades come apart and hit the sails, none of it hits the kids.
Yeah, no, that's way too. That is it would be way more chaotic in real life.
If they made this today, at least a chunk of one of the rotor blades is like taking somebody's face off.
And when you think about it, effect wise, I didn't see, was that, how big do you think the scale of was that for that?
They had a full size mock up of it.
Right.
And in one of the deleted scenes, you can see the shark attacking the pilot underwater. It's a little bit more graphic.
I don't know. I just get I get nervous. I think about like the tragedy that was the Twilight Zone film.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, I hope they didn't get that close to the kids.
Yeah, I worry.
Yeah, I'd like to think they didn't do that.
Yeah. That's another film that we'll be covering on the show.
Yeah. Have you seen it?
A long time ago.
Yeah, I don't remember much about it. I saw it when I was a kid.
It was just like a big budget version of like a few of the episodes, and then like a newer episode.
It doesn't have a great reputation even without the incident, right?
Yeah,
it's not really like well regarded. I don't think so.
No.
Well, we'll get there at some point. Yeah, I mean, the whole like final act of this film, I guess if you want to call it like the regatta, the sailing regatta that the kids have going on, and then like Brody going after them to rescue them, it's pretty good.
Yeah, I think that the way that the climax of the film also, it's very satisfying.
They set up the power cable earlier when Hendrix and that boat captain accidentally pull it up. So it doesn't just pop out of nowhere. You've seen it before. Yeah.
So it's a logical, satisfying way for Brody's already proved himself very capable of being able to put the pieces together of like, wait, this is what's going to take out the shark.
Yeah, yeah. He's smart. It's definitely well established. I think the whole thing's pretty well paced. It's a little bit under 2 hours, which is the appropriate length for a film of this sort. I'm sure if they made this in 2025, it would be 2 hours and 40 minutes for whatever reason.
Yeah.
I forgot Brody crashes his boat into Cable Junction, which is pretty funny.
That's pretty funny.
Makes him look pretty stupid. But then he redeems himself by killing the shark. And the special effects... Oh, before I get to the special effects, worst acting performance in the film for me is from the girl that played Jackie. Her screaming.
Oh, grating. Yeah.
It's a strange edit from director Jeanne Schwark because he just keeps cutting to her numerous times.
It wasn't like, I don't know if there's a specific way to describe that technique other than annoying.
I don't think they had an acting coach on set.
Yeah.
Not for the teenagers, at least. Or, no, never mind. It was Roy Scheider.
Oh, there we go. Is that a bad sign if there's an acting coach on set?
Probably, but I don't know. We should ask Ivan.
Yeah, we'll ask Ivan. Yeah. I can ask Ivan in person.
You're seeing him?
On Sunday.
He's in your area?
For an event for work.
Okay, cool. Well, you tell him I said hi.
I will.
The special effects when Brody kills the shark are passable.
They're excessive.
A lot of sparks.
Big explosion. Rest in peace to that, whichever number of the shark robot replicas there were.
So that caused a blackout on the island, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think Brody gets blamed for that by the real estate developer guy?
That'd be hilarious. But I feel like, which shark demise do you prefer, the first film or this one?
Obviously, the first one is better. This is arguably funnier.
This is perfect for this film.
Yeah, it's perfectly cheesy.
It's
because the first one's not cheesy at all.
No, the first one is satisfying in a different way. Oh. Yeah, that's like you find, like, what is it? Just Ahab finally got the white whale.
Yeah.
In the end, this was the sparks are flying, huge explosion. This is what happens when you actually put a big budget behind, like, put a big budget, and the studios are like, make sure that it's exciting.
It's decently written too, because earlier in the film, that pretty useless marine biologist tells him that like sharks are attracted to noises, so he uses that knowledge. Yeah. Like he's a smart character, and that's why, again, you're rooting for Brody the whole time. He's a very easy guy to root for. I love the reaction of the kids on the rocks. Yeah, man, Mike, that's your dad. Oh no, he's knocked out.
Oh God. Did it feel kind of like the Goonies?
A little bit, because the corny catchphrase that Scheider is saying. It's a open wide, say ah.
Yeah.
It's, it's not as good as Smile, You Son of a Bitch.
Classic.
Classic. Yeah, it's, like I said, everything that happens in the climax is like 60% as good as the original Jaws.
But this is exactly what I would imagine a typical summer blockbuster,
Yeah,
right?
great summer movie.
It's like so this time, right? This is the heyday of the drive-in, and I'm very happy we have drive-in theaters in our area. Just sitting back, you get a light summer breeze, and you see a shark exploding.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good time.
You see some fiberglass melting.
Yeah, we'll take it. I think I told you first time I saw Dune 2, drive-in.
Yes. We get a film score by John Williams.
Lucky them. And
That's a good thing. This is a great score. Again, elevating the film.
Who else are you going to get with that budget, right?
They were wise to bring him back. They knew what they had immediately with the first Jaws, because that was his first Oscar win.
Yeah, and
this was right off Star Wars and Close Encounters. So they were like, let's keep this guy around. He's pretty good.
Yeah, that's one way to put it. Pretty good.
He's pretty good. This guy, John Williams, knows what he's doing. It's amazing. He was just as active in the 2010s as he was then. He's slowed down now because he's like 90, but no, he's older than that. I think he's like 92, 93.
Well, you know who hasn't slowed down? Robert De Niro, because he's 80 and has a child.
I saw that. Yeah, that I don't have anything else to say about him. Do you have anything else to say about Jaws 2?
What was your favorite piece of merchandise that you saw researching for the film?
It has to be the Topps trading cards. It has to be. Although there's bathroom towels you can get.
Bathroom towels. I saw lighters. I saw poker hats. You know those poker hats that you wear?
Yeah, to do your taxes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like what? Like who needs that?
Somebody needed it in 1978, apparently.
I think there was also international merchandise that I thought that was really cool that I remember. I'm pulling it up right now. The Jaws 2 Japanese merchandise is super sick. Some of these toys are really, really cool.
There's action figures?
Minifigures from Japan, made by the famous company Takara Toys. They partnered with Universal for a lot of like the wind-up toys and just kind of smaller toys for their earlier like hits. Like they did the toys for E.T., Back to the Future in Japan.
Okay, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
They affordable? You gonna get some?
I'll take a look, see what's up.
Because if there's any film that you want action figures from, it's Jaws 2.
Yeah, exactly.
Is the real estate developer one of the toys?
That'd be hilarious.
What about the woman driving the boat that was pulling the water ski?
What about the 35-year-old high schooler? Was he one of the twins?
He's got to be. I don't even remember his name. That's how. Wait, was the drinking age under 21 then? Because aren't they at a bar drinking at one point in the film? Was this during the time when the drinking age was 18? I think it must have been, right?
I don't know how far back it was, but this was also.
I think it was.
This was Martha's Vineyard, right?
Yes.
I feel like you're in a state where the drinking age would be 21 earlier than other states.
No. It was 21 originally, and then after Vietnam, they lowered it to 18, and then it got changed back to 21 at some point in the 80s. So I think this was when it was 18. But when you're a 35-year-old high school student, it doesn't matter.
That's true. Good catch.
He's like, hey, Mike, you think your dad's going to be around this vacation? What's your dad going to do now that he got fired?
So glad I don't have to watch them again for a bit.
That was the ugliest decade for hair and clothes, right? The 70s? It has to be.
What is it, the perm? Everyone had a perm?
Everyone just had, like, just massive hair. Like, it's...
Yeah, just like they just let it go.
Yeah, but just the clothes, too. Like, the 80s... The 80s has a charm to me that the 70s doesn't. The 60s, before all the hippie crap, had, like, timeless clothes.
Yeah. Not as in love with the 70s.
No. I don't know. We're rambling at this point. Anything else to add about Jaws 2?
I think I'm ready for us to grade this thing.
Alrighty. This is a sequel to a film that did not need a sequel. It was always going to be diminishing returns. It's a total ripoff of the first Jaws, and it isn't ashamed of it at all. It knows what it is, and I actually kind of respect the film for it. Roy Scheider is easy to root for. He gives an all-time carry job. For a sequel that didn't need to be made, you could do a lot worse. It's a very enjoyable horror summer sequel for me. It works really well if you view it back to back with the first. It works reasonably well as a companion piece. I said 60% before, and I stand by that. I think it's about 60% as good as the first one. Unnecessary and derivative, but not bad. I really don't mind it. I have time for this film. I recommend it. It knows what it is. I give this a B minus. I like Jaws 2. It's nothing special. It's no great movie, but I enjoy it for what it is.
I think that the box office speaks for itself in terms of what kind of film this is and its appeal. It's a glorified B movie with the benefit of having the template for one of the greatest thrillers, horror films of all time, have you? And if you have that already in your corner and you have the main lead in the same film, you're not going to have a horrible, horrible movie. And as long as you follow the assignment, and I feel like this film followed that assignment, a few things feel a bit dated, and considering the fact that it is cheesy in some points, I feel like the structure of it all, the pacing, the way that the set pieces, in general, everything about this film reminded me so much of the original Jaws in a good way, and not necessarily in a way that just felt like it was beating a dead shark carcass. Now, I do think that for me, this still feels a bit more in that B movie territory. At the end of the day, while it's entertaining, I find that it almost feels like a grievance if the only lesson that the big studios got was, well, we can do no wrong as long as we follow the same script for sequels. This probably you're right, Pat. This probably accelerated that for every other sequel.
But do you think it's the exception to that rule?
But I do think it is the exception in that it's still a very serviceable film and still very entertaining. Now, for me, I think that I do like this a little bit less than you, but not by a lot. I put this one into C+.
Fair. I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to give it. It was either C+ or B-, and then I looked up what did I give Halloween 2, and it was a B-. So I was like, okay, this is pretty much on par with that for me. So, couple quick notes. By the way, that's it for Jaws 2.
Yep, later.
Yeah, Jaws 3D is bad. I do find limited entertainment value in it just because of how horrible the acting is, and it's filmed in SeaWorld, and it's cocaine-fueled bonkers.
Yeah, you thought if you want to make fun of a Jaws film, 3D is one to make fun of.
It's definitely fun to watch. It's a horrible movie. It's a glorified F, I would say.
But it's super funny.
It's super funny. Jaws: The Revenge is
not as funny.
Borderline unwatchable.
Yeah, that one's not as funny.
Yeah. It's almost fascinating to see how bad a film can be if you're interested. It's almost worth watching once just to see like how bad can a movie get. But yeah, nothing really else to add to that.
Yeah, and now if this was a video analysis YouTube video, we would now have a montage where we go through the great sharks in movie history.
There's not many.
Yeah. The Sharknado, Jaws 1,
The Shark and the Spy Who Loved Me,
Deep Blue Sea.
Right. Yeah, there's not many. It's a short list.
Jabberjaw.
I don't have anything else to add about Jaws 2.
Nah, I'm done.
Yeah. Well, Anton, we'll see the listeners next week for a new episode. I don't know what it's going to be yet.
But whatever it is, it's going to be good.
It's going to be good. It's going to be fun. All right. Well, thanks for listening, everyone, and see you next time.